Well, good morning, and welcome to day 32 of our study. We're in Mark's Gospel, chapter 9. We're going to start in verse 2, probably get down through verse 13 this morning. I can remember years ago, I was watching a basketball game, and I don't even remember who was playing, but I remember the guy that was calling the game. The commentator was Rick Barry, a retired NBA superstar. And they were at halftime and they just came out of a commercial break. And you saw this was back in like 1982 or so. It was quite some time ago. And you saw on the court during the halftime, there were about a dozen women that were dancing and they had like hula hoops and sticks and balls. Now, what I'm describing, you're probably thinking, well, that's rhythmic gymnastics. Back then, there was no rhythmic gymnastics. We'd never heard of it or seen it. So this was something completely new. So that's the scene. Commercial's over. The game is back on, but it's halftime. And Rick Barry, I will never forget how what he said. Comes back and he goes right into NBA announcer mode. He said, "Well, here we are at halftime, and the Lakers are over the Rockets by 4 points at the half, and we'll have all the first half summary for you in just a moment. But for right now, let's watch these lovely young ladies demonstrate the finer art of." And that's when you realized that he was just in announcer mode. He wasn't paying attention to what he was saying because he got to that part where he said, "Let's watch these ladies demonstrate the finer art of," and he went, I don't have any idea what they're doing. One of the funniest things I've ever seen. He had no idea what he was seeing. That's what today's passage is. The apostles are going to see something that they do not understand. And we're going to read something that we've read many times before, and frankly, I wonder how well we understand it. Something incredible happens. Let's go ahead and look at it. Starting in verse 2. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up on a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses who were talking with Jesus. That's not something you see every day. Jesus starts to glow, and then Moses and Elijah themselves show up and start chit-chatting with Jesus. For just these few moments, these apostles see Jesus in an entirely different way. They catch a glimpse of his divine glory. Now, his miracles and all that had already given them the inkling that this is something new and special. Jesus is not just an ordinary person. But now Moses and Elijah are there, and Jesus is literally glowing. So Peter, the way that Peter always handles a crisis or an unusual situation, Peter speaks right up. Look at verse 5. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." I love the next verse. He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Yeah, Peter's always been the kind of guy, if you don't know what to say, he'll say something anyway. And Peter figures, okay, Jesus is now going to start this kingdom. And Moses and Elijah are here to help him get the kingdom started. Obviously, that's what's going on. So, Jesus, let me take over. Let me build a headquarters here. Let me build a little house for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah, because obviously up here on this mountaintop is where we're going to have our headquarters, and we're going to need a base of operation. So Peter decides, with Jesus, Moses, and Elijah all right there, that it's probably Peter who should be in charge and take over now. Suffice it to say, Peter really didn't know what he was saying. In fact, this whole episode is rather overwhelming to the apostles. Verses 7 and 8 say this. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." I think that was directed at Peter. This is my son. Peter, Peter, this is my son. Listen to him. Verse 8. Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. Now, we don't know how long the three were cowering in fear. But when Jesus came to them and got them to stand up again, everything was quiet and back to normal. It was a great event. That much is obvious. But what was it? And what did it all mean? How do we understand it? Why was there a transfiguration? And what did that have to do with anything? We don't get to have the Olympics this year. They're going to be pushed back. We're going to have them next year. But I love the Olympics. I watch the Olympics every time they're on. I spend way too much time watching them. I'm looking forward to next year when we can enjoy them. And I remember when my kids were little and we were watching the Olympics once, and it was the opening ceremonies. And these opening ceremonies for the Olympic Games are always spectacular. I mean, there are men on stilts, there are acrobats, there are dancers, there are flying kindergarteners, there are flaming hula hoops, there are grandmas riding Harleys, there are squirrels shot out of cannons, there's grandmas shot out of cannons. It's spectacular. And I remember watching all this spectacle once, and my youngest son Jordan said, "Dad, what does this have to do with the Olympics?" That's a good question, because the answer is really nothing. I mean, it's spectacular to look at, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the Olympics. That's not the case here, is it? Where we have this spectacular event, we have Jesus glowing, we have Moses and Elijah show up. Well, what did this event mean? What's the significance of it? Well, what's the most important rule of interpreting anything in Scripture? Context. What's the context? What happened right before this? Well, if you recall in the last chapter, Jesus had asked Peter and the apostles, "Who do people say that I am?" Well, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're this or that. Okay, but who do you think I am? And Peter said, "You are the Messiah." And we know from other Gospels, he also said, "You are the Son of God." Now, was Peter correct? Yes. And this marked a great turning point in Jesus' ministry, because no longer in the Gospels are we going to see Jesus trying to convince the apostles of who he is. They know who he is now. He's the Christ, the Son of the living God. He's the Messiah. He's God himself. And now Jesus is going to switch from trying to prove who he is to teaching them about what he was sent for, his task. He's going to start telling them about the cross. In fact, as soon as Jesus first mentions the cross and his death, Peter says, "Oh, no, that's not how it's going to be." Now we have the transfiguration. The context of the transfiguration is Jesus has revealed to his apostles who he is, and now he's starting to teach them what he is sent for. So they've been told he was the Messiah. Now, the Messiah is a messenger from God. You know who else was a messenger from God? Moses and Elijah. Now, Moses and Elijah, to the Jewish minds, they represent the two great tenets of Jewish theology. Moses represents the law. Elijah represents the prophets. So you have the law, you have the prophets, and you have the Messiah, the manifestation of all three standing right there. Now, let me ask you this. If you have Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, and I were to ask you to rank them, who is the greatest? Now, I don't know who you're going to put down as number 2 or number 3, but who are you going to put as number 1? You see, this event showed that Jesus was superior to the prophets, superior to the law. This was something else. Why was he superior? Well, what did God call him? My son. My son. When you see that connection, it changes everything. I graduated years ago from San Jose Bible College. Since I graduated, they've changed the name of the school twice and moved to an entirely new city. But when I graduated, it was San Jose Bible College. And Bryce Jessup was the president of the college when I graduated. Good man. Good man. I really like Bryce. Bryce is kind of, and still is, a legend on the West Coast. And Bryce, I'd known Bryce for a few years, being a student there. And Bryce had known my father for many, many years. You see, my dad was a referee for years and years and years, refereed basketball. And he did a lot of college games, and he got called quite a bit to referee at this tiny Bible college. So Bryce had known my father from refereeing. But it wasn't until the night that I graduated that he realized, and he came up to me and said, "You're Wally Blair's son." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've never put the two together. I knew you had the last name, but I never put two and two together." And then he looked at me again and had this kind of a, "You're Wally Blair's son." Well, that changes everything. You see, once he realized who my father was, it changed. This is what it was like for the apostles. This is my beloved son. You see, the transfiguration showed them kind of what they already knew, that this was the Son of God. However, when a voice booming from heaven says, "This is the Son of God," that's even more reassurance. So the transfiguration does that. It confirms Jesus' place as God's Son. You know what else it does? It shows us that the leader we are following is worth following. We're in an election year. So we're going to talk about leadership quite a bit in the coming months. Not only that, we're in the middle of a crisis. And so we're all desperate for leadership. Now, I'm not going to get into who you should vote for. I'm not going to get into who's right, who's wrong. You won't hear politics from me. But I do want you to understand this. It is inherent in us that we want to follow a leader worth following. We want to follow a leader we can believe in. That's what we have in Jesus. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who wins an election. It matters who our heavenly leader is. And we want to have confidence in a good leader, because a good leader will lead us through difficult times. We are all in difficult times right now. Our leader is Jesus. Don't forget that. Have a great day. Stay positive, and we will see you tomorrow.